Job done and light conversation. After marveling at his work for more than a few minutes, Arthur stepped back from the hole and heaved a heavy sigh as he turned to walk away. Having used Excalibur and feeling the excitement of using such a powerful weapon, a realization dawned upon him in that moment. That was his first use of the weapon. As such, he knew that wasn't the extent of his power. He knew that the sword could go further and destroy more than just a base the size of a village. The blade was beyond dangerous, and the fact that he was the one who owned it gave a sense of omnipotence but at the same time worry. Gonna need to be careful with this. Absolutely, power corrupts absolutely when there's nothing that can stop you. Your very own sense of morality begins to shift. He never considered himself a good person and has always thought killing was something he would do with the right incentive. The worry was the fact that with the power he might lose himself in the power and nothing good ever comes out of being an arrogant villain who believes he's undefeatable. Hopefully I won't have to use you too many times, buddy. He tapped the hilt of the sword as he said before taking steps forward. However, he didn't take too many steps as suddenly 5 people suddenly dropped from the sky. Despite the darkness of night, he could still see who they were. I thought you were leaving this side to me. He addressed the members of Blue Rose as he relaxed his posture and approached them. Arthur. What happened here? What was that bright light? Lycius was quick to rush towards him. The serious expression on her face conveyed a great sense of worry. The other members ran behind her. I just took care of the problem. I came to take care of, no need to panic. He nonchalantly answered in a very sharp contrast to her slight panic, although he did appreciate that she was worried about him. Well, he is just assuming that she is. That was you. You're the one who caused that. How? Evely spoke, practically jumping at Arthur, seeking answers. She was naturally inquisitive and curious, and what she witnessed was a marvel of magic. Evely, calm down. Holy shit. Lycius was unable to finish her sentence as she was quickly interrupted. Gagaron, who had walked past Arthur, went to observe the crater that she assumed he made. Her shout caused everyone else aside from Lycius to run toward her and see what she saw. That was a massive release of magical energy, so brilliant and dense that when it hit the ground, it was like a hammer striking the earth. This is incredible. She shouted in elation. This was the first time she had ever seen such a thing in her long life. She had thought it was a magic beam at first, but a beam that big would have to be hot and melt the target, but the hole looks like it was by something solid. I know, look at how deep it is. It's like an abyss, I can't even see the bottom. Shove. Ha. Gagaron screamed in surprise as Tina jokingly shoved her just slightly to give her a scare but quickly pulled her back and caused Gagaron to fall back on her butt. Goddamn Tina. Don't do that. The twins giggle mischievously at their larger friend's reaction to the fake scare. I didn't know you were such a wuss, all that muscle is for nothing. Tia commented while still trying to stifle her laughter while her twin sister used hand gestures to jokingly mock Gagaron for her reaction. Yeah, really funny. Do you know how heavy this armor is? I would have died. Gagaron complained while tapping her armor with her left hand and decided to stay seated on the floor and not tempt fate. I'm sure it's not that deep, and besides, I'm sure your bones are made of steel or something. Tina commented after silently mocking her teammate, and Gagaron could only silently sigh at her ridiculous notion of thinking human bones can be made of steel. What? It could happen, like how monsters evolve. Her twin nodded, agreeing with her words. But I'm human, so I can't happen. We don't know that. Gagaron rolled her eyes before turning to look at Evely, who seemed to be preoccupied with something as she stood there silently. Hey shorty, how deep is this thing? I don't know, throw a rock in it or something. Evely said dismissively as she felt the left ambient mana of the light. It was impressive that something could condense mana to the point it acts like a physical object. None of her old friends had that much mana, not even Rigrid or Riku. Okay, but what are you doing? Being impressed, that light was so densely packed with man that I'm certain this place now is going to be a good spot to perform rituals. She said with confidence before turning to face Arthur and leaving Gagaron confused about what she was talking about. Arthur, how did you do this? You're not a mage, at least you don't seem to be. Evely asked as she moved closer towards him. Everyone else fell silent at her question and waited for Arthur's response. Isn't it obvious? He asked as he tapped his sword, indirectly hinting at the idea that he used the sword. However, the others seemed to wait for him to answer properly. I did say my sword was dangerous when we first met, didn't I? So now you know how dangerous it is. What's its name? Evely asked with urgency. She doesn't remember any sword capable of such power. Even the swords of darkness were never that potent, or rather they had magic effects, like wounds that cannot be healed, instant death attacks. No sword could release such potent amounts of mana. Right, I never told you the sword's name is Excalibur, the sword of promised victory. Cool name, right? He stated as he took the sword out and showcased its pristine form and got a few nods from both Lycaeus and Gagaron. Evely entered a deep contemplative state trying to think if she's heard the name of the sword any, but she could not recall anything about a sword of promised victory. Damn, that's one powerful sword. Hey Lycaeus, can yours do that too? It's a legendary sword, right? Gagaron asked. Although Lycaeus has used Kilinirum plenty of times before, she had never used its full power, or at least from what Gagaron has seen. I don't know, Kilinirum is rumored to be able to destroy a whole country, but I have never needed to use that much of its power before, so I don't know. She answered honestly. For the most part it is not true that the sword may take over the user's mind and thus only a strong-willed holy maiden can use it. However, it is true that if one is not careful the sword's power may be too much to handle. Well, in any case, that golden light was epic. I didn't think you had something like that as a trump card. Maybe you aren't such a wimpy pretty boy after all, although it wouldn't hurt for you to gain some meat on those muscles. Gagaron commented and laughed heartily, causing Evely to roll her eyes from beneath the mask, and Arthur couldn't help but comment back at her words. I have all the necessary meat, adding more would be overkill, if you catch what I'm throwing down. Ha, ha. Hearing his words, Gagaron laughed vigorously, slapping her knee, while the more innocent members of Blues Rose, mainly Lycaeus, could not help but blush at such a statement. That was quite funny, but please, you'd break like a twig. You can't handle all this muscle, pretty boy. Well. All right, enough, we all finished our work. Let's go back and report. Evely denied Arthur the opportunity to respond and forcefully ended the crass conversation between the two, and they all began to walk as a group. By the way, Arthur. Does the sword release the mana independently, or does it draw it from a source? Evely asked out of curiosity. For the most part, that magic swords usually have a source they draw power from in order for whatever magical effect they have to activate. That is how all the swords of darkness function. The sword by itself is powerful, but it draws mana from me, but only a small amount. Are you saying that that thickly dense mana that lit up the sky, half of it was yours? Are you serious? Only mages could have mana reserves that are even close to that. Once again Arthur shocked the members of Blue Rose, with Evely being the one most shocked by such a revelation. Out of all of them she was the one that was most sensitive to mana, and a human with highest mana capacity she knows is Rigrit, and the mana release earlier dwarfed her by at least 20 times over. That means Arthur outclassed Rigrits in mana capacity by 10 times. I've never seen a human with that much mana before. Well, he is from another continent, so. Gagaron said as much, deciding that such an explanation was enough for her. However, Evely could only concur with her for the moment, as she realized asking personal questions might be rude. Would you guys be interested in joining a night order I'm planning to create? He threw the question in the air and forced a long silence as everyone waited for him to explain further, but he did not elaborate. Sup y'all, hope you're having a great week. Your support is very much appreciated, so thank you very much. How was the banter and playfulness in the chapter? Did it feel out of place or just right? Perhaps you have some ideas you think would help me improve, so please share your thoughts. 13 comments, 0 vote. Aftermath. 1 week later. The end is near. The end is near. The end is near. An elderly man wearing priestly clothing roamed the streets of the capital, shouted at the top of his lungs about the possible end of the world. The normal folk did their best to ignore him and going about their day. It has been over a week now since the man began shouting about this. Most citizens were sick of it. Isn't that the old priest from the church? Yes, it is. I heard he got kicked out of the temple of the 4 great gods for preaching things not on the scriptures. Can you blame him? That light turned night into day, and only gods are capable of such power. 2 street vendor women spoke to each other, gossiping about the latest news this week. I know, but to say that signals the end of the world is stupid. That golden light could have been a decree from the gods about something that isn't the end of the world. The woman explained to her friend. Arthur's display of Excalibur's power was national news at this. Of course they did not know that the light was generated by him. However, everyone in the kingdom of Re-Estais and beyond experienced the phenomenon of night becoming as bright as day. Some took it a light of the heavens punishing sinners that were so vile the gods had to intervene. Others thought it was a descent of the gods to live amongst, and others believed it to be a light signifying the end of the world. But regardless of what it truly was, it had folk talking about it. Those who were more magically inclined went to study the location, and to understand it, and those who feared it fled to whatever place they thought would be safe from the coming apocalypse. Those who were religious went to church, same with those who were never religious, and those who didn't care, they still had work to do. What do we do? Zweden asked his fellow department heads as they sat in the dimly lighted room, having an impromptu meeting. They suffered significant losses in the span of a week. Their drug trade department was essentially crippled, as it would take months before they can fully grow back the plant to make black dust. Plus transporting of goods from different villages takes a lot longer and clients aren't that patient. Not only that, but black dust was used to render the people they kidnapping catatonic and make them dependent on the drug. That has become quite significant, and more than a few of their recent kidnapped have attempted to escape. For the most, 3 out of 8 departments are affected by this. We dismantled the security department and took all their profit and divided amongst ourselves. Most of that profit went into Hilmid pockets as extra fund to cover the cost of transport and the cost of security, since we dismantled 6 arms. Christopher summarized. Despite dismantling 6 arms, they still had the remaining members still in 8 fingers, however with a lower status than before. 6 arms was an invaluable department as it projected their merchandise, but everyone in this room agreed that Zero's price was far too high for a glorified bodyguard. As such, they tore the department down, but at the same time they regretted that decision. Thanks to all that, we had to pull back on our efforts to take over Yggdrassil. Our main fighting force was 6 arms. With Zero, Succulent and Davernok assumed dead, our fighting power is cut in half. As an undead, Davernok would have provided us with an undead army, and a person like Zero would have been our answer for Gazepstranov, and the rest of 6 arms would handle Blue Rose. He continued as he felt his portly stomach churn on the inside, however not out of displeasure but out of disappointment that he was unable to assimilate 6 arms to his department like Zweden had done with the information brokering department. Wouldn't that have been pointless since it's Blue Rose who killed Zero anyway? Coco Doll pointed out. As far as they know, Blue Rose is the one responsible for killing and destroying both bases. No point discussing that anymore. For now, let's pull back a bit and patch ourselves up before coming back in full. We're currently a mess right now. We'll keep our presence known, but we'll be less active. How does that sound? Hilma suggested, as she huffed smoke off her pipe, and nobody seemed to disagree with her. It seemed they all recognized that they weren't in a position to continue business at this rate. What about the golden light? Are we going to search for such a person or weapon capable of that? It would be significantly helpful to us right now. No need to worry, I already have my people looking into that. The leader of Blue Rose is rumored to have a legendary sword, so I'm certain she's the one responsible. If she owns one legendary sword of darkness, it's possible she owns another sword of the opposite alignment. Zweden explained his hypothesis, and everyone in the room gave their nods. Well, now that's settled, I have an appointment with a certain handsome red-haired man. Coco Doll said seductively, letting everyone know about what he plans to do before standing up and leaving, signaling everyone else to end the meeting and leave as well. Somewhere close by. The silence in the room was thick and overbearing. The remaining 3 members of 6 arms sat solemnly in a round table as they said nothing to each other. Within the span of a week, their entire department was dismantled and demoted to nothing more than a mere shadow of itself. The security department was now just the security. Maybe we should recruit new members to fill our numbers and work our way back to the top. I'm sure there's plenty who would want to work with us. Malmvist of the 1,000 kills, he was a man with a handsome face and unusually blood-red hair. Usually his poise is brimming with confidence, however not right now. He spoke to his remaining co-workers. His face showed a frantic expression of panic, as in the span of a week he had lost all his prestige and respect within 8 fingers. The sudden disappearance of Zero, Davernok and Succulent gave opportunities to the other heads to get in and pick apart the security department, leaving nothing, forcing the other members of 6 arms to accept positions similar to bodyguards. Oh, shut up, you idiot, no one in this kingdom can replace the boss, and where else are we going to find an elder lich like Davernok? Don't be stupid. Edstrom, a chocolate-skinned woman, with beautiful silver hair, her face was beautiful with nice red lipstick that conveyed a level of sexiness. She was slim and flexible. As a dancer it was only natural that she is, wearing alluring thin silk fabric with a myriad of golden bangles on her wrists. She responded to her comrades' statement as she rested her elbows on the table and began to contemplate a new career path. 8 Fingers was never a united organization governed by friends who respected each other, but rather one run by greedy sins of bitches that would gladly backstab each other for the right price, so it's not unexpected that such an organization would do exactly what is in its nature. Then what do we do? You can't tell me you're fine with our position right now. Even if you are fine with it, I personally don't want to be blackmailed by that ugly twink. You know what he's into. Malmvist uttered with more than a little disgust in his voice. Coco Doll certainly had a taste in men, and he knew he was just the type that a person like Coco Doll would like. Well, that's your problem, pal. If he wants you, he is going to get you, but me, I'm done with 8 Fingers. The only person I respected was Zero. With him gone, then I'm gone too. She explained. She certainly had options in terms of career paths, both a dancer and an assassin, plus there aren't that many dancer assassins, so her skills are unique. Agree, however I suggest we first avenge our leader. Persherian uttered his first words. Unlike the other two, he was not much of a talker, or, rather, beneath his full amour, the disgraced former knight was simmering in anger directed towards the people he believed were responsible. You saw that giant hole on the location where our 8 Fingers base used to be. You think you can take on whoever made that? Malmvist asked. Blue Rose, I am confident I can contend with Blue Rose. Whatever it is that they used was a legendary item that they could only use once. Otherwise, why would they eradicate one base and scorch the other? Persherian reasoned. 2 bases of 8 Fingers near the capital were destroyed. The light that night I today was probably an item that was used to destroy the base. Why did they use such a powerful item? Persherium did not care. He was certain they wouldn't use it again, especially not in a populated area. That makes sense, but what if you're wrong? Whatever the item is, it obliterated a village's worth of land and turned the night into day. I'm not risking anything with that kind of power. Edstrom explained. It didn't matter if they could only use it once. Anything with that much firepower is dangerous, not to mention it was a week ago, meaning the items could be used again. I'm with her on this one. The peasants are even calling that whole thing a signal for the end of the world, and I'm inclined to agree. HMPHU would not avenge the very person that gave you the life you have been living. Is this what you are? Cowards. Hearing those words, both Edstrom and Malmvist bit their tongues. Their arrogance would not allow them to let being called cowards slide, however at the same time risking their lives for a dead man wasn't on the cards. Do not worry, Blue Rose would not use such a weapon in a populated area after they fancy themselves as heroes. Persherian added, it was true that such a weapon capable of destroying villages would not be used in areas with innocent people. After all, Blue Rose destroyed the base to protect innocent people. What's your plan? Edstrom asked, deciding that her boss was at least worth hearing Persherian's plan out. Castle Training Ground. Members of Blue Rose watched as Arthur and Lachias sparred against each other. Beside them was Gazef and a few other knights as well. Sir Arthur's sword technique is quite interesting, it. Gazef said, drawing the attention of the others from the somewhat intense and somewhat light-hearted spar, or rather Lachias looked to be trying very hard to land a hit on Arthur while he dodged and parried her attacks. He really wanted an opinion on Arthur's sword style as he saw some glaring flaws in it. I guess you could say that. He doesn't attack but instead seems more focused on tiring his opponent because attacking, but I can't say I like it. Is that so? Why? I guess you could say from what I know he can do, it's disappointing that he isn't more decisive. Indeed, decisiveness is essential in achieving victory in a duel. Arthur seems to ignore obvious openings that would not doubt end the fight, but he favors taking his time and turns all his battle into that of attrition. Gazef found that to be an odd choice of fighting styles for someone who is a knight. I believe it suits him well. People like you can't afford to waste time in battle, but Arthur can. He's trump card as a one-shot kill type attack and covers a wide range as well, so a battle of attrition is convenient for him. Evely commented, offering her 2 cents on the matter. She was a long-distance fighter, as such she can't really comment much on things, but from her perspective Arthur's sword technique was logical. If his sword is the trump card, then that means it's better to tire out your opponent than just obliterate everything on sight. Yeah, that is true, but that doesn't mean he can't be more proactive with his style, but it's a preference, I guess. You'd think he was a cautious man with that kind of lighting. Gagaron explained, and Gazef couldn't help but feel that these two knew something about Arthur he didn't, but regardless, he still sided with Gagaron. While the spectators that mattered spoke, the ones that didn't cheered for the leader of Blue Rose, for her to land a hit on the Knight of the Princess. Their jealousy for Arthur was always present, and they were always reminded they themselves could do nothing to him, so cheering for someone else harm him was all they could do. Although Tina and Tia cheered for the Eevee boss to win, not because of their jealousy towards Arthur. Oh come on, Holy Valkyrie, is that all you can do? Arthur jokingly asked as he slid his shoulder to the side, avoiding the cold steel of the blade from touching him, and his words only served to infuriate the blonde-haired maiden all the more, much to his own amusement. UGHH, stop saying that. She complained to her opponent, with her cheeks flushed red in embarrassment and with a silent prayer in her head, hoping no one could hear what she and Arthur were saying. She pulled her sword back and then did a thrust action aimed towards Arthur's stomach, which he parried to the side, causing her blade to swing sideways. Then make me stop, Holy Valkyrie. Using the momentum of her sword that was parried sideways. She then spun around, swinging the sword all the way around. Arthur put out his sword to block, but Lachias quickly reversed her spin and spun again, going G for the side that was unguarded. I will. Clank. She expressed, responding to his prompt, but thanks to Arthur's reflexes, he was able to block her attack. Damn it. Is a holy maiden supposed to swear? Shut up. If you can't make me, then why would I? With such a response, Lycius could only simmer in her own frustration as she looked at Arthur's annoying smile. Seeing the amusement in his eyes. How are your reflexes so good? I can't even land a hit on you. When you're just built differently, you're just built different. Arthur playfully responded and received a deadpan look from the frustrated blonde adventurers. Come on. I'm being serious. You come on, I'm being serious. Whatever, keep your secrets. I don't need them. She said as she pouted in frustration, and Arthur could not help but chuckle in amusement. Fine, land a hit, and I'll tell you how I'm so good at dodging. We can even finish the story I was telling you last time. You're gonna regret those words, en garde. She jumped into attack, and they resumed their spar. However, while the both of them were enjoying themselves on the balcony about the training, grounds Princess Renner watched them with squinted eyes of suspicion. She wasn't certain she liked how close they were getting. This is fine, I know him better than she does, so this is fine. She convinced herself that she knew who he was and where he came from. As such, Lycius could not compete with her. Arthur was. Milady. A maid interrupted her thoughts. Yes. The Yndra Patriarch says he will be ready for your arrival tomorrow in the evening. Thank you for letting me know. You are dismissed. The maid took a bow and left, leaving Renner to think deeper about them. No doubt it will be known that I'm meeting with the Yndra family tomorrow. That was her goal to begin. It's a subtle announcement that she is starting to make her moves, and with the meeting being so early no one can stop her now, although she does wonder if someone else will come to her about the marriage that her father brought up a while ago. It would be a good way for her to definitively state her intentions without actually saying the words. How do you like the interactions? I enjoy writing them, so I hope they're good enough. Tell me where I need to improve. 23 comments, 0 vote. Expected ambush. Welcome, Your Highness. An elderly butler opened the door to the Yndra family abode and greeted the princess with a bow, whilst gesturing for her and entourage to enter. Entering the home of the Yndra family, both Arthur and Renner were greeted by quite the lavish and luxurious living room. The wall hung beautifully art pieces that drew the eyes of any guest. The furniture was luxurious as well, with the table having been made of a crystalline glass-like structure and having a simplistic vase on top of it. Having entered the room, Renner was greeted by the patriarch and his wife, as they both stood and offered greetings with a bow. Azimuth was a lanky yet tall man who stood at a tall height, his eyes a shade of green and hair was short, barely going past his ear, and blonde. Both green and blonde hair were traits his daughter inherited from him. His face was clean-shaven without a beard or mustache. His wife, on the other hand, was a beautiful maiden with dirty blonde hair and clear blue eyes. She was plump and buxom with ample breasts and equally ample behind. Arthur could easily tell that Lycius's father certainly had a type, and he didn't disagree with it. Welcome to our humble home, Your Highness. Azimuth spoke, with his wife offering a silent curtsy. Common noble etiquette is that the wife does not greet the guests if the husband is available. It is my pleasure, Viscount. Your home is quite impressive. Renner complimented as the butler led her to her seat. Renner was the first to sit, and the host sat right after her. However, Arthur remained standing behind the couch, which oddly bothered Renner for some reason. Sebastian, please bring us some tea. Which do you like, Your Majesty? Zenith, the wife asked the princess. Another moment of common noble etiquette. The wife is to always be the one who provides the guests with refreshments, or at the very least be the one to mention them before any discussions take place. Any type is fine, but although I have hardly had black tea in a while, so perhaps I'll try it. With that said, the butler bowed and exited the room to prepare the tea. I must say, Princess, hearing the news that you wish to meet with me was something I had expected quite a while ago. Is that so? Indeed, my lady, ever since the rumors of our involvement with each other began, I take it that such rumors began because of your acquaintance with my daughter. Thus began the small talk. Arthur suppressed the urge to roll his eyes at such a tedious thing. Nobles never get straight to the point and must always meander around the conversation, but it was fine after all. After this meeting, things will be interesting again. Indeed, I thought it best to let their imaginations continue to concoct whatever it is they want, plus such rumor made it easy for this meeting to happen, so I thank you for not dispelling them once you heard about them. Of course, Your Majesty, but I myself have goals I wish to achieve as well. But before we get into that, is the man behind you, Sir Arthur Pendragon? The swordless swordsman? Indeed, I see his reputation is not lost on you, Viscount. Renner replied, feeling an odd amount of pride, but of course, she made sure not to show it on her face. Of course, his fame stretches throughout the kingdom. I heard he slayed an undead dragon in Yggdrassil and got rid of the giant basilisk, both terrifying creatures that only high-ranking adventurers can handle. Azimuth continued with a glint of excitement in his eyes. The Viscount was the type of man who respected warriors like Gazepstranov, as such people like Arthur with great accomplishments always sparked his interests. I would not know anything about such things, so perhaps speak to him about it. Renner moved the conversation to Arthur, and the Viscount turned his head towards the knight, with curiosity. So Sir Arthur, how was facing a beast with a petrifying gaze and deadly poison? The beast was hardly a challenge. Once you know its blind spot you can easily defeat it, although I'd say the poison is still deadly even after it's slain, but overall it was not a challenge. Of course, although still new you irradiate the aura of a distinguished knight, it's men like you that this kingdom needs. Asmith concluded, and Arthur could not help but feel a bit proud of himself. Getting glazed was never a bad thing, however at the same time he did not have a response to the Viscount's statement, but luckily the butler Sebastian came into the room with some maids who began setting the table for tea. The tea is ready, my lords and ladies, he announced as the maids began to pour the tea for everyone and handed it to each individual, including Arthur, who didn't really like black tea, but whatever. If there's anything else, please do not hesitate to call for, I'll be excused, the butler announced before he exited the room with the maids, leaving everyone to their discussions. Your Highness, excuse my boldness, but what brings you to my humble abode today? The Viscount asked, deciding to get to the meat and potatoes of this meeting. Renner took a sip of her black tea before realizing it did not have enough sugar and proceeded to put 3 sugar cubes in the tea, stirred, and sipped again before answering his questions. As you know, both my brothers have the backing Marquis Baloop and Marquis Raven. Asmith gave her a nod. He understood what she was getting at, which meant he could possibly gain something from this as well. Barbro is the crown prince, meaning that the throne is practically his. If he was an only child there would be no doubt about that. However, there's Sanak, who is also eligible for the throne. When there's 2 princes a succession war is an obvious occurrence. The birthright of inheriting the crown becomes a contest, and the one who has the most backing is usually the winner, or rather the side with the most influence and manages to convince the king is the winner. The point is to convince the king that the prince, whichever one, has trustworthy retainers that will guide him to be a good king, and unfortunately, both Sanak and Barbro were at a stalemate. As such, I wish to have your support so that I may be able to stake my claim at the throne as well. This would have been quite the shock if Asmith hadn't already seen it coming. There has never been a woman as a ruler before, and unlike the prince, a princess is only ever used as a political tool to strengthen the relationship between the royal family and a noble family of influence. For a princess to want the throne is unheard of. Asmith's wife beside him could not help but feel like this was a huge deal, but her husband wasn't reacting to it, so she maintained her composure as well. Within the noble court there's 2 factions that dominate. The noble faction and the royal faction both hold significant sway in the decision-making and policy-making. However, there's also nobles like me, who don't fall in neither and are essentially neutral. We're few in numbers but we exist. Because of the 2 dominant factions there's a lot of rampant corruption. A significant amount of nobles partake in criminal activities, and that is unacceptable. I suppose it is, isn't it? Renner agreed, already seeing where the Viscount was going with his statement. I will offer my support and will recruit others who are unaffiliated with any faction under the condition that you place me in charge of the court of law. Asmith stated with a firm look in his eyes. He didn't used to be unaffiliated with the faction and in fact was part of the royal faction, however he became disillusioned with that when saw that it wasn't only the nobles faction that partook in illegal activities but a large majority of the noble court. The reason the kingdom is suffering so much is because of the rampant corruption in the noble court. The nobles like to think the kingdom is on par with both the slain theocracy and the empire, but in reality we are far behind both in development and in firepower, and we'll never achieve both if we allow such corruption to continue any longer. So with that in mind, Your Highness, please allow me to be in charge of the Re-Estais court of law. The man took a bow as he seemingly begged the princess, and both Renner and Arthur could see where Lycias got her sense of morality from, although Asmith's admiration of Arthur convinced him that Lycias's chunny behavior is somewhat inherited from her father. Very well, as the princess right now, I cannot do much but secure me the throne and your dream is guaranteed. Coincidentally me and your daughter as well as Arthur here, have been trying to root out and destroy 8 fingers, knowing that our objectives align is very promising. She said as much before both she and Asmith stood up and shook hands. Indeed, Your Highness, I look forward to working with you. With a firm handshake and a bow, Asmith concluded before turning to look at Arthur. It was a pleasure meeting you, Sir Arthur. I hope to hear more of your adventurers in the near future. Arthur gave him a nod and a smile as he followed Renner toward the door and exiting the house, leaving the hosts feeling 2 different emotions. The wife was feeling shock over the fact the princess wanted to participate in the succession war, with slight disappointment that she won't be able to gossip about it, and the husband had a huge grin on his face, feeling more than a little happy over what he talked about with the princess. Darling, let's celebrate. he announced before suddenly picking up his thick wife by the waist and lifting her up. His lanky build was very misleading. Although if Asmith had a single disappointment, it would be the fact he did not see his daughter with the princess. He feels there was a misunderstanding with her that needs to be fixed. Why did you not sit next to me in that meeting? Renner curiously asked Arthur after having entered the carriage. Closing the door, the two sat parallel to each other, with Arthur facing towards her. The carriage moved. There were little guards around the carriage despite it belonging to the princess, and there was only the coachman and Arthur. Of course, with Arthur there was little danger to the princess's life. What do you mean? I believe my question is clear. Arthur felt some hostility from her, something that confused him a bit. Where did it suddenly come from? I thought a knight was not supposed to sit while his lady is seated. Isn't that common etiquette? I suppose it is. Forgive my sudden outburst, she said, deciding to let it go. It seemed that his closeness with Lycius the other day had bothered her more than she was willing to give it credit. Do you want me to sit next to you next time? He asked, and Renner remained silent for a bit. The answer is yes. She wants to foster a deep relationship with him so that he is emotionally dependent on her, but at the same time she can't force that, so answering yes would be forcing it, but answering no would be pushing him away and he might get closer to Lycius. I would say yes, but if you feel it is unnecessary, then I will not question you, she answered. Renner could not help but feel like she was suddenly the one who wanted his attention rather than the other way around. Would you like me to sit next to you right now? Arthur pushed his advantage. It seemed his relationship with Renner was progressing well, which was a good thing, although he wondered what he did wrong to garner her hostility from earlier. Ah. Before she could answer the question, the carriage suddenly stopped, and they both heard the scream of the coachman, signaling to them there was a problem. How inopportune, but it looks like you were right. Bam. Arthur kicked the carriage door open and launched the individual who was preparing to open it forcefully. The sight that greeted him was an empty street with 3 individuals standing waiting for him. Well, 2 individuals, one was sprawled on the ground with the carriage door on his chest. There was a look of shock as soon as they saw him. He was definitely not who they were expecting to see. I believe you were expecting someone else. Well, tough tighties, you got me instead. Apologies, y'all, I planned to upload on Thursday but I got lazy and I was watching Peak Dungeon Meshing, so sorry for that. Also, hopefully, the relationship with Renner and Arthur isn't too fast and feels believable enough. 21 comments, 0 vote. Display of strength. The idea was fairly simple and practically an easy thing to execute. The remaining members of Six Arms had decided to not just attack Blue Rose but instead pick them apart individually. Edstrom had convinced Persherian of that, as she believed whatever weapon they used would be troublesome to deal with. With that plan in mind and with a little self-sacrifice from Malmvist flirting with Crocodile, they were able to find some information regarding the princess and her trip to the Ainz family estate, and considering her closeness with Blue Rose they figure at least one member of Blue Rose would be with her, so it was a simple matter of ambushing her carriage. Luckily for them, Crocodile was offering some good money if they managed to not only capture Renner but capture Lycius as well. Their simple revenge mission turned into a worthwhile assignment that all 3 of them were willing to partake in. Greed was always a strong motivator. What? Are you really so shocked? The handsome wordless swordsman questioned with mirth in his attitude, something Persherian did not appreciate. He could feel that they were being underestimated. Hardly, just disappointed that only one of our targets is present. Edstrom confidently asked, however inwardly she cursed herself for even agreeing to this plan. The spy within the castle conveyed that the princess's dog would not be attending to her. Did they lie, or was there a mix-up of information? And which one of us is your target? The undead dragon slayer asked, and Edstrom hesitated to ask. That was not because of fear but caution. She did not know how fast he was. His moniker was the swordless swordsman, and that could mean he could draw his sword so swiftly that it looks like he never drew it at all. Fucking bastard. Do you have any idea how much these clothes cost? The measly pay of a knight could never cover the cost needed to clean them. Malmvist roared in anger as he stood up briskly and threw the carriage door in the air and swiftly sliced it into pieces with his fencing sword and displaying his skills at the same time. I believe I asked a question. Or are your heads so full of shit that it blocked your ears? Arthur stated, feeling far more agitated than he thought he would be. He had thought he would be more excited but he wasn't. It seemed that their unwelcome interruption of his conversation with Renner irritated him more than he thought. And if we say we came for the princess? Persherian boldly answered as he drew his very nimble sword. The sword itself was akin to a very sharp rope, and Malmvist took a fencing stance. Then your only obstacle is me, the knight announced, very much aware that his lady was watching. Despite knowing that not all women would be attracted to men who display their strength as a way to gain attraction from women, Arthur could not resist the age-old tradition of showing off in front of the hoes. Renner watched with keen interest. She was never one to enjoy things like battle. She was a lady that liked literature, her preferred genre being a murder mystery, more specifically book where the serial killer plays a sort of game with the investigator, as such displays of brute strength were never things she liked to watch. However, she did like displays of power, showing why your opponent is utterly helpless against you, always made her feel tingly inside. Obstacle. Hardly. Renner was familiar with the name and descriptions of a majority of members of Eight Fingers, including all the members of Six Arms, and the one that responded to Arthur and moved first was Malmvist of the Thousand Kills. She doesn't know where he got the moniker from, but his time in the King's army he was notorious for brutally killing 100 soldiers from the Baharuth Empire before he was dismissed for attacking even after there was a mid-battle ceasefire. She suspects he made it up when he joined Eight Fingers. Flashing thrust. The man started off with a thrust. The flashing thrust was a technique, or rather a trick, that created a bright flash that was emitted from the tip of his fencing sword. This allowed him to temporarily blind his opponents, allowing him to strike a lethal spot, like the throat. The attack was an instant kill type of attack. Renner was forced to shut her eyes at the sudden bright light, but her ears heard a clear distinct sound of metals clashing, forcing her to quickly open her eyes again and see Arthur grabbing the hand of his attacker. The fencing sword was split in two, its blade separated from its base. How? Malmvist could only let out a befuddled question, and Arthur answered by pulling him closer and slamming his fist onto the man's stomach, forcing saliva out his mouth before letting go of the arm and slamming a fist at Malmvist's jaw, completely destroying it and knocking the man out cold. Seeing such a display, Renner's eyes lit up, impressed by her knight. However, she could not offer praise, as Prasharian of the spatial slash moved quickly. His speed was immaculate and her eyes had difficulty following him. Wham! Just as Prasharian got closer, Arthur moved. In a flash of a second, the black-armored knights found his back slamming onto the ground and felt a foot crush both his chest and armor, forcing him to cough up blood. However, whether by fortune or by misfortune, he did not pass out, but instead did his best to endure the pain, but unable to remove the foot of his chest. So what's your deal? She watched as Arthur firmly placed his right foot on Prasharian and leaned on the knee of the same foot. Another quick and simple takedown of the enemy from her knight, but once again before she could enjoy the scene he released his aura, the same one that had caused her to feel fear, but this time it didn't reach her, but she could feel it. The sudden coldness of the air and slight heavy weight on her shoulders, but she was fine. The woman Edstrom was in a far worse situation. Renner never thought she would enjoy the look of horror on someone's face so much. It was as if the woman was seeing a demon god in the flesh. The Golden Princess smiled once again. No one witnessed it, but her true smile revealed itself. Like a demon enjoying the suffering of its victims, her demonic face laid itself bare, but none saw it. I asked a question. Despite Arthur speaking normally to Edstrom, his voice made her ears vibrate and internal organs jostled. Her knees became weak and her body trembled. The mere idea of running felt like a daydream. She could never get away even if she tried. The only thing that came to mind was, I'm here to serve. Edstrom dropped to her knees and offered her servitude. The weight of his aura felt as if it would crush her if she did nothing, and not only that, but it was clear as day that Eight Fingers could never touch the princess with him as her knight. Self-preservation is always a good call. Well, that was unexpected. Arthur retracted his aura and looked at Edstrom with a look of amused surprise. The plan was to capture them, but it seems that they'll get a servant out of it too. Excellent. Renner sounded with elation in her voice as she walked down the carriage steps. Your plan worked perfectly, Renner. An intentional slip of the tongue caused both to pause just a bit, Arthur deciding not to recant his words and waiting on her to respond. That it did, Arthur. She responded with a bright smile, which in turn caused him to smile back at her. Very short chapter, sorry about that. Has anyone ever had the hose or watching dog lock-in moment? I've had several, and only one ended in success. Edstrom won't be anything but a servant assassin. Thoughts on relationship so far? Am I moving it too fast, or is it still too slow? 10 comments, 0 vote. Defending a lady's honor. Royal Castle. It was an absolutely stellar afternoon. The sun was up directing its heat below, and there was a gentle breeze that offset the heat, creating a cool afternoon atmosphere, a perfect weather for garden viewing. Both Arthur and Renner sat beneath a large umbrella that provided them with shade. Renner had her own tea set with 2 maids tending to her, and Arthur had a glass whiskey that he requested from the maids. He wasn't much of a drink in his past life, but he did so when he could. And because the giant was quickly finishing building the wall of Asgard, Loki, who essentially came up with the idea, was placed in charge of making sure he didn't finish his work. Renner listened, as Arturo recounted the story that led to the birth of Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed. The princess was amused as he had previously told her about another equally hilarious story of Thor having to cross-dress. Guess what he did? I imagine he concocted a plan to stop this giant. No, he didn't not do that. If he didn't, Sleipnir wouldn't have been born. Oh. Oh my. She said at the realization of what this god named Loki did to ensure that the master builder could not finish building the wall. A melodious giggle escaped her mouth as she realized the hilarity of the story. The small giggle turned into a small laugh before she quickly collected herself. A lady must never laugh loudly. I have both those stories have changed my perspective on the definition of a god, truly I could not imagine. She said still with an amused smile on her face. The two of them were at the garden, the place where Arthur had landed. The crater was still there but new flowers were planted around it and it looked like someone was trying to build something inside the crater. Arthur imagined it would be a type of patio or something similar. If you think that's bad, wait till you hear about the story of the sky god Zeus. He responded. He was telling her about these stories mainly to pass the time as they were waiting for Lycius in order to discuss further about what to do with the captured Six Arms members and the information they received from them. The meeting was being held outside because Renner thought it best to have some maids hear bits and pieces and create rumors, which boost Arthur's favor among the nobles, increasing his value and make things easier for when Asmith begins recruiting for her faction. I'm doubtful. Sleeping with a horse is worse than anything I can imagine. You can even make it into a new torture method. You'll see. As the two were speaking, Lycius made her appearance as she exited the castle and made her way towards the two. She was followed by two people, two nobles, to be exact. Margrave Yarovana and the young Marquis Pespi. Seeing the two Marquis could not help but roll her eyes in annoyance. It seems her father is trying to overwhelm her with insistence and persistence. Prim Renner, these two gentlemen wish to speak with you. Lycius announced as she arrived before Renner. She decided to let her seat be free, allowing one of the two to be able to have a seat. Good afternoon, Princess. Hope this fine day is treating you well. Margrave Yarovana greeted and the both of them bowed their head. There was not need for introductions, at least not to the princess, but the Margrave saw it unnecessary to properly introduce himself to Arthur. However, the young Marquis Pespi decided it was necessary, so he spoke. A pleasure to see you today, Princess, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Sir Arthur. The Marquis extended his hand for a shake, and Arthur obliged and gave the man a firm handshake with clear eye contact. Likewise, good sir. The name's Alden Aldrich Walden Pespi. Please refer to me as Marquis Pespi. I'd prefer you refer to me as Sir Alden, but I am no knight, so Marquis Pespi will do. The young Marquis smiled as he smiled, conveying his goodwill, and Arthur gave him a silent nod. Yes, now that introductions are over, Princess, would you be willing to converse with us privately? Margrave Yarovana asked, while covertly implying that Arthur and Lycius should leave. I see no reason why we cannot discuss whatever you need to say right now. Renner sipped her tea after having said as much. She already knew what they were going to say and she did not plan to make the conversation too long. Yarovana looked at the people present before taking a seat, deciding that both Lycius and Arthur would eventually hear about the matter regardless. However, he did give Arthur the side eye, expecting him to give his seat to the Marquis, but unfortunately that did not happen. What is it that you wish to discuss, Marquis? It's the matter of the marriage that I believe the king spoke to you about. We came here to ask you to reconsider. Arthur could not help but look Renner straight in the eyes once he heard the word marriage, and raised his brow, silently questioning her as she did not mention anything regarding that to him. Reconsider? I believe I made myself clear. My father should have told you that. Princess, please understand, this marriage is imperative not only to the relationship the nobles have with the royal family but to the balance of power within the noble court. Currently Prince Barbro is married to the daughter of Marquis Bulup, and Prince Zanak also has yet to decide on a fiancé, so your marriage to the nobles faction will balance the status quo. So essentially, this is about your own self-interest rather than actually about me. Of course, Renner knew that marriage was purely about the noble faction obtaining Arthur under them and stripping her of any political influence or power. So you let Prince Zanak remain undecided on a fiancé, yet you are pushing the princess to get married. That seems a bit unfair, does it not? Arthur questioned, pointing out the unfairness of the situation. It seemed pretty clear that Renner had something that Zanak did not have, which was clear that it was himself. The situation is different and cannot be compared. Yarovana defended. Of course the situations were not that different or the same. The only difference was that unlike a prince, the princess had less room to decide on this, which was why Renner wanted to choose her partner long ago, because she understood that when the time came she would have not much of a choice. Regardless, I will not be marrying anyone and this matter is no longer negotiable. If my father has decided to ignore the reward he had decided to give me for saving the country from a drought, then I have no obligation to follow his demands. Princess, please, Rico. The young Marquis could not finish his sentence as Arthur stood up and loomed over him menacingly. I do believe the lady has spoken, not unless you wish to force her to do something she does not want. If that's the case, then you'll have me as your enemy. Silence descended in the area. Arthur's words forced Marquis Pespi to step back in a bit of fear. This was the first time someone had threatened him so blatantly. You dare threaten a noble? A mere knight presumes to think he can threaten us. Margrave Yarovana stood up in righteous fury. He was a tolerant man and who usually ignored the common status of others if they were useful. However, he was still a noble and to be disrespected by a commoner was unacceptable. My knight has every right to defend my honor, Margrave. Any threats toward him are threats towards me, so choose your words carefully. Renner warned, and the garden was once again thrown into silence, and the wind blew, providing the only noise in the area. Apologies, Your Highness, please reconsider the marriage and we'll speak to you again in the near future. Margrave collected himself as he spoke. Despite his face showing a calm expression, he hid beneath it an anger that seemed to refuse to calm down, but at the same time Arthur was the very prize they wished to acquire, so he had to swallow his anger. Good day to you, Princess. Bidding farewell, the two nobles left, and for some reason, Renner couldn't help but smile as she watched their retreating figures. This was the first instance where she did not have to bow to the power of the nobles and they didn't have the power to control her. She was elated, it finally felt like she had control over her life. Thoughts on the chapter? I wanted to write something completely different, but things just sorta wrote themselves, but I think it turned out well. 21 comments, 0 vote.